30 seconds. That's how long Dostoevsky's seizures lasted. But for him, it was an entire eternity. In these moments, the writer experienced what others would never encounter in a lifetime. Time dissolved, consciousness expanded to the boundaries of the universe, and the biblical "there shall be no more time" became literal reality. Doctors called it the aura of temporal lobe epilepsy. Dostoevsky called it a touch of absolute truth. What if his illness was not a curse, but a key to the mysteries of existence? What if there is no boundary between neurology and mysticism, but only different languages for describing the same phenomenon? The ability of consciousness to transcend time and space. Dostoevsky's epileptic episodes weren't the violent convulsions people commonly associate with epilepsy. Instead, his seizures happened in the temporal lobe, causing intense shifts in his state of consciousness. These episodes, known as auras, might have been brief, just 10 to 30 seconds, but to him they seemed to stretch into hours or even whole lifetimes. He often described these moments as filled with a profound joy that was completely unlike anything in everyday life, impossible for others to even picture. But these experiences weren't just fleeting happy moments. They fundamentally altered his perception of time, space, and what things meant. Dostoevsky's way of talking about them didn't conform to any standard psychological explanations. During an aura, Dostoevsky felt his sense of self expand beyond his own being, reaching what he described as the ultimate unity of life. In a letter to his friend Nikolai Strachov, he explained that during these times he truly understood the biblical idea that there shall be no more time. This wasn't just metaphorical for him, it was an exact reflection of how it felt. Time didn't flow in its regular fashion. Instead, he experienced what he called an eternal instant, where everything came together all at once. From a scientific standpoint, the temporal lobe is responsible for dealing with memories, emotions, and our sensation of time passing. It houses our brain's internal clock, keeping our perception of time flowing smoothly. But when seizures interfere with this area, the feeling of time can totally unravel. For Dostoevsky, instead of causing confusion, these episodes lifted the veil on a deeper reality. He started to believe that how we normally experience time hides the true eternal nature of being. What made Dostoevsky different from others who had similar seizures was how he interpreted them. Most people see these auras as pleasant but ultimately meaningless experiences. For Dostoevsky, they were insights into the deepest truths of existence. He developed an entire philosophical belief system around what he thought these episodes revealed about the fundamental structure of reality. To him, the auras were like visions that saints might have, a direct connection to the absolute truth of everything. In his writings, he detailed how these auras played out. They began with a feeling of inner light and a huge surge of harmony, along with a deeper understanding of the universe. He noted that, while in this state, all life's contradictions suddenly resolved themselves. Big questions about suffering, God, and the battle between good and evil found their answers, but only in that unique state of mind. Ordinary consciousness couldn't retain those revelations. These special experiences had a profound effect on Dostoevsky's views on religion. He came to think that when Christianity speaks of eternal life, it's not about something that comes after death, but rather a different type of consciousness we can tap into right here and now. For him, the aura was a hint at the state of being that Christ might have experienced all the time. This belief led him to interpret Christian teachings in a unique way. Salvation wasn't about escaping the world, but rather transforming our consciousness to perceive the eternal already present in everyday life. However, the price of these insights was enormous. After each aura, Dostoevsky would suffer severe seizures, leaving him physically and mentally exhausted for days, if not weeks. He described the experience as falling from the height of spiritual ecstasy into the depths of physical and moral despair. This stark contrast created a deep internal struggle that would influence his entire life and work. He had peaked into an ultimate truth and unmatched joy, yet it came at the cost of his well-being and everyday life. He pondered a troubling question. Was this deep knowledge really worth its terrible cost? His condition also added to his feelings of loneliness. How could he describe things that went way beyond normal words and thoughts? He figured out that trying to spell it out just shrunk the vastness into simple terms that didn't quite hit the mark. This pushed him towards storytelling, a way to share those deep truths without saying them outright. Using characters like Prince Mishkin and Alyosha Karamazov, he could give readers a glimpse of these deep ideas through their stories. Back then, the medical world brushed off his philosophical takes, seeing them as just signs of his neurological issues. But Dostoevsky had a different angle. He thought they had it wrong, believing that consciousness was the main thing, with the brain only acting to tone it down to a bearable level. To him, epilepsy wasn't a flaw, but a brief break from those limits, letting awareness reach its full potential. This idea was ahead of its time, hinting at today's science talks about how the brain is linked to our personal experiences. All right, so in the next part, we dive deep into something Dostoevsky called the phenomenology of the eternal moment. Here, we're unpacking how the auras he experienced during his epileptic episodes gave him a peek into realities we don't usually notice. He explained there's not just one, but two kinds of time. First, you've got horizontal time, which is what we're familiar with, a straightforward sequence where events follow one after another, forming a neat line from past to present to future. But then there's vertical time, which is wild. It's where every moment seems to happen all at once. It's kind of like flipping through a photo album and seeing all the pictures at the same time. When one of these auras hit, Dostoevsky's mind would switch from that normal progression to this wild jumble of vertical time. This shift let him see everything all at once, like looking at life from the top of a mountain rather than wading through a river, and his sense of memory took on a whole new flavor. Normally, recalling something means digging up the past, right? But in these states, every memory felt as real and immediate as the present moment. He was essentially living every part of his life at the same time. And on a whole other level, he felt connected to what he described as a universal memory, a vast reservoir of human experiences far beyond anything personal. In these sudden revelations, he didn't just perceive his life. He seemed to tune into the core of all human existence, like he got a glimpse of the grand design behind it all. Emotionally, these experiences were off the charts. Dostoevsky said he felt this immense, boundless love, not aimed at any person or thing, but more like he was experiencing love as the fabric of everything. Yet, He also felt deep sadness for human suffering, along with an intense joy for the beauty of life, all blended into one big emotional stew that captured the whole human experience in a single moment. Now, when it came to thinking, these episodes brought what he called absolute understanding. It wasn't a logical, step-by-step kind of knowing. It was like he suddenly had all the answers to life's biggest questions without actually piecing them together. Stuff like the reason the universe exists, or why there's good and evil, why there's suffering, and the idea that death is just an illusion. It all made sense during these episodes. But once the aura passed and he returned to normal, these answers stayed with him more as an intuitive grasp than as detailed insights. His sense of space also went through a radical change during these experiences. He no longer felt bound to a specific location. Instead, he sensed himself existing everywhere, all at once. This sensation, which he called cosmic consciousness, stretched his self-awareness to encompass the universe itself. Surprisingly, this didn't erase his personal identity. Instead, he found what he called his true self, which was far deeper than the Fyodor Dostoevsky everyone knew. In those moments, he felt he truly understood himself, not only as the renowned author, but as an endless consciousness temporarily wearing the guise of a human. Trying to articulate all this, though, was a nightmare. Regular words just couldn't do justice to these profound insights. Language usually considers differences between things like me and you, or this and that. But during an aura, these boundaries vanished. He once said, trying to describe these eternal insights was like attempting to paint a symphony or carve music into a sculpture. That's why he developed what he called indirect communication, a way to tuck deep insights into his storytelling. His goal was to offer readers a slice of his higher consciousness experience without directly explaining it. His philosophy began to focus on the link between individual and universal consciousness, hinting at how what we think of as our own is just a tiny piece of a vast universal consciousness present in everything. He came up with this idea of different levels of consciousness, ranging from our limited personal awareness to a universal cosmic consciousness. For most folks, their awareness lands somewhere between these extremes, sensing a bit of both, but not fully reaching either. However, during epileptic seizures, these barriers could break down, allowing consciousness to access its full cosmic potential for a brief moment. The philosophical insights Dostoevsky gained from such experiences led him to reject materialist philosophy. He figured if consciousness could transcend time, space, and personal identity, it suggested that consciousness itself must be more fundamental than physical matter. Dostoevsky toyed with what you might call consciousness monism, the idea that everything originates from a single, eternal consciousness. On the other hand, things like matter, time, and space were considered secondary and temporary limitations that this consciousness imposed on itself for reasons only understandable from an eternal view. This perspective turned the common scientific view on its head, which usually regards consciousness as just a byproduct of complex material structures. Part 3. Dostoevsky laid out a whole new way of seeing the world, one that he pieced together from what he experienced during his seizures. He put forward this groundbreaking philosophy that really went against the grain of what most people believed at the time. Central to his theory was what he called the eternal consciousness principle. This was the idea that our day-to-day self-awareness is actually just a tiny piece of a much larger, constant consciousness that makes up the real world. Dostoevsky didn't think of this eternal consciousness as some distant god or abstract concept. To him, it was the core part of who we really are. He saw it as a tragedy that most people lived their whole lives without ever tapping into this deeper part of themselves. His seizures, though tough, gave him a rare peek into what he felt was our shared true nature. In Dostoevsky's view, the universe wasn't just a flat surface with one way of seeing things. Most folks live on the surface level, which he called the world of appearances, where we all live out our days seeing ourselves as separate little beings ticking along in time. But beneath this, there's a deeper world of essence, where everything that seems different is actually an expression of a single, unified, and eternal consciousness. These weren't two separate worlds, though. They were different eyes through which to look at one reality. His eternal consciousness principle argued that the deepest truth about any moment we're going through is its connection to eternal existence. He took a gutsy leap by rethinking personal identity. Normally, we see our identity as this blend of memories, habits, and roles that shape who we are. Dostoevsky believed this was just a mask worn by eternal consciousness. He identified two types of self: the empirical self, which exists in time, changing, aging, and eventually dying, and the transcendental self, part of the eternal consciousness. He believed that during his seizures, he connected more with this transcendental self, realizing that personal death seemed more like an illusion. The empirical self might meet its end, but the deeper, eternal consciousness inside everyone remains untouched. He also rethought the whole issue of evil and suffering using this big-picture view. Most people see suffering as meaningless pain that takes away from life's joy. But with the eternal consciousness he glimpsed, suffering took on a different role as a critical piece of consciousness experiencing everything in the universe. He suggested that eternal consciousness chooses to manifest in our time-bound lives to fully dive into all experiences, not shying away from suffering and mortality. This idea didn't make pain any less real or severe, but it gave it importance within the grand experience of consciousness. When it came to free will, Dostoevsky spun things entirely around. Most debates on free will assume time is linear, flowing from past to future. But when he considered all moments as existing at once, without past or future lines, the lines dividing cause from effect faded away. He introduced a new idea, call it eternal freedom, meaning consciousness chooses its path from a timeless perspective outside the typical flow of time. It suggested that each of us crafts our life tales, picking them as our own adventure through all possible states of consciousness. By crafting this metaphysical system, Dostoevsky opened up a way to bridge how we see ourselves individually with much wider universal truths. Imagine the wild ride from mind-blowing mystical states to the pit of depression. Those ups and downs show the incredible range of the human mind. Problems like mental illness, crime, and addiction aren't just medical issues or societal headaches. They're more like spiritual emergencies where people lose touch with the deeper parts of themselves. Fixing these isn't just about tackling the surface stuff. It's about making that deep-down spiritual connection again. This is why he was always fascinated by folks who lived life on the razor's edge. Thinking about consciousness as something eternal also stirs up some profound social and political thoughts. If we're all just different reflections of the same consciousness, then what looks like conflict is really just us chatting with ourselves on a cosmic level. This doesn't mean social problems like injustice and oppression aren't real. Instead, it puts them in a wider context, encouraging us to confront these issues fully while considering what lies beyond them. Dostoevsky didn't go in for those revolutionary dreams of creating heaven on earth, nor did he vibe with conservative views that turned a blind eye to justice. He talked about something he called conscious participation in eternal change, which means diving into life fully aware of its fleeting nature while also tapping into its timeless backdrop. This perspective challenges the core of traditional logic and science. If the deepest truths are grasped only through direct experience rather than logic or sensory evidence, then the typical tools of philosophy and science aren't quite enough. They're useful, sure, but they're more like the launch pad for a bigger quest for knowledge. Real understanding, according to Dostoevsky, comes from experiencing a true connection with the eternal, feeling that oneness with the cosmic consciousness at the core of everything. This way of seeing knowledge was way ahead of his time, hinting at future study areas like phenomenology and consciousness research, which explore human experience in a deeply personal way. Part 4. So let's break down what Dostoevsky was grappling with in his own unique way regarding the pain people endure, and how that ties into his ideas about eternal life and infinite love. Typically, people trying to figure out why God allows bad things to happen bring up topics like free will, the larger divine plan, or some sort of ultimate justice. But Dostoevsky, who experienced intense visions due to his epilepsy, had a deeper, more complex view about how perfect goodness is linked to human suffering. In the moments just before his seizures, he felt an overwhelming sense of eternal love and a deep understanding of all the suffering people have gone through, both now and in the past. From this broader perspective, suffering wasn't simply erased. Instead, it appeared necessary to a larger understanding of a meaningful life. He was drawn to the idea that pain and joy, along with the good and the bad, are interconnected pieces necessary for truly exploring what eternal consciousness is all about. Dostoevsky believed that to really experience love, you also needed to know hate. To value justice, you had to confront injustice. Therefore, each painful experience was like a part of a bigger picture. However, he didn't say that understanding this bigger picture made suffering acceptable or excused those who caused it. Instead, Dostoevsky thought our understanding of morality needed to consider more than just punishment or reward. In his view, Dostoevsky highlighted the idea of innocent sufferers, featuring characters like Prince Mishkin, Alyosha Karamazov, and Sonia Marmeladova. These characters remain connected to this eternal reality, even as they face life's toughest challenges. For them, suffering isn't pointless. It's a way of showing that love and goodness can withstand any trial. So, when someone suffers without doing wrong, instead of contradicting God's goodness, it's actually consciousness making itself vulnerable in order to gain deeper insights. This is similar to how Jesus is seen, as consciousness embodying a finite form to experience and transform human suffering. Conversely, Dostoevsky also dealt with what happens when people deny this eternal aspect of themselves. Characters like Ivan Karamazov and Raskolnikov depict what it looks like when someone is so engrossed in their earthly existence that they reject a bigger perspective that might offer meaning to their suffering. Ivan's issue isn't about denying God's existence. He's enraged by a world where innocent children suffer. Yet, even such rebellion is seen as consciousness testing itself, pushing against the greater truth to see if it can truly be trusted. Ultimately, these rebels have to choose whether they'll feel lost in a seemingly pointless world or have faith in a deeper meaning beyond their immediate understanding. For Dostoevsky, the idea of choosing to suffer wasn't just a theoretical concept, it was a key part of his moral philosophy. He thought that if consciousness could see its entire life from a timeless standpoint, then each person has chosen their own blend of joy and suffering. It's not about simply surrendering to fate. It's about realizing that consciousness is actively opting to explore every possible aspect of its potential. For Dostoevsky, the best way to respond to this insight was to accept life wholeheartedly, always keeping in mind its endless significance. This concept introduced a kind of spiritual bravery that didn't run from pain or surrender to the harsh reality of suffering. Imagine this. If all pain somehow serves a grand cosmic purpose, it might make folks feel like it's okay to just accept injustice and oppression. But Dostoevsky had a different take. He thought that if we really get how suffering is eternally significant, it should motivate us to actively work on easing pain right now. Not because we'll ever eliminate suffering completely, but because being in tune with the timeless truth means we should fully engage with our duties here on earth. Someone who truly embraces this idea of eternal awareness would be working tirelessly to reduce suffering, while at the same time recognizing that suffering plays a necessary role in the universe. When it comes to guilt and doing the right thing in a world shaped by our consciousness, Dostoevsky draws a line. There's one type of guilt that results from our specific actions day to day, which he calls empirical guilt. Then there's a much deeper feeling of duty, or transcendental guilt, where your consciousness gets the blame for the situations it ends up in. So, if someone commits a crime, they're completely responsible and should deal with consequences in the present. But looking from that transcendental angle, both the wrongdoer and the victim are just different aspects of the same eternal awareness, experiencing moral growth from different angles. This introduces a way of viewing justice that takes earthly actions seriously, but is also profoundly compassionate because of this shared cosmic bond. When it comes to mending those deep psychological and spiritual wounds, this idea of eternal awareness brings a fresh perspective to standard therapy approaches. While traditional therapy often aims to eliminate symptoms and restore normalcy, what Dostoevsky proposes is more about relinking the suffering soul to its eternal foundations, transforming the pain into something meaningful rather than just curing it. This doesn't mean practical steps toward healing aren't vital. It just means they happen within a context where even unfixable experiences carry deep significance. The ultimate goal isn't just everyday happiness, but to align with what he called the conscious journey towards merging with the ultimate truth. It's about understanding that every single experience contributes to the infinite self-exploration of the cosmic consciousness. Part 5. Materialism claims our mind's just what happens when the brain's all wired up, a result of those complex chemical and electrical activities going on in our heads. But in his seizures, Dostoevsky felt like consciousness broke out of those limits, showing that the mind and reality are more than just brain chemistry side effects. During his seizures, he experienced things that seemed to turn the normal ideas about how consciousness works upside down. It was like he tapped into a realm that wasn't tied to regular physical processes, offering a glimpse into a universe where the mind takes center stage over matter. For example, as these episodes hit, the usual sense of time got weird. If consciousness was just neurons doing their thing, it should follow regular time. However, he found himself interacting with past and future as if they were all happening at once, something no physical process should be able to manage. This taught him that consciousness had depths that couldn't just be explained by physical matter. The stuff he learned from these moments put a wrench in the straightforward ideas of materialism, too. He found himself discovering truths that had never come through his senses or conscious thoughts. He grasped deep cosmic laws and universal truths, things that seemed to come out of nowhere, beyond his personal experiences or any cultural teachings he'd had. If the brain just mixes around what it already knows, seizures shouldn't bring out new universal wisdom. But they did. These revelations questioned the idea of personality as just a mix of our genes and surroundings, a sort of biological outline. Dostoevsky's experiences suggested the existence of a deeper self, a transcendental self that stayed untouched by the ups and downs in brain chemistry or environment, something that outlasted life's changes. It implied that the real essence of a person was rooted in this eternal consciousness, way out of the reach of materialistic interpretations. Dostoevsky also critiqued materialism's take on morality. If humans were only biological machines, then real moral choices would just be illusions. Decisions would just be the result of previous physical events, leaving no room for real choice or moral accountability. But these moments, where consciousness went beyond physical limits, pointed to real freedom and moral action, based on something deeper than just biological urges or societal rules. Finally, he challenged the materialist views on human suffering and meaning, arguing that they missed out on deeper insights that could make sense of human experiences' mysteries. From a purely physical angle, consciousness might just be seen as a random product of evolution, lacking any real meaning or purpose. In this view, suffering is just an annoying obstacle to avoid, and death is seen as the total end of a person. But through his epileptic experiences, he saw suffering as an essential part of consciousness's journey of self-discovery, and regarded death more as a transformation than an end. This perspective helped him find meaning in things materialism writes off as bad luck. Human experiences like cherishing beauty and creativity also seemed to clash with materialist ideas. Things like beauty, the spark of artistic inspiration, and creativity bursts suggested that consciousness could reach beyond physical explanations. During his intense experiences, Dostoevsky described perceiving ultimate beauty and infinite creative possibilities, things that couldn't simply be boiled down to brain activity. He thought creating art was about connecting with a never-ending creative energy, something that keeps the world alive. Art and beauty, he believed, were basic human needs, not just extra bonuses for getting through life or fitting into society. He had his bones to pick with the way materialism affected society and politics. If we're just physical beings reacting to our surroundings, the idea was that you could create perfect societies by tweaking those surroundings. But he saw this as an attempt to shape human nature from the outside, dismissing the soul's part that no government could ever completely control. He wasn't a fan of revolutionary socialism because it viewed people and change through a purely materialistic lens. For him, genuine progress in society came from recognizing the deeper, spiritual side of our consciousness, not just treating humans like physical objects. Part 6. Dostoevsky had an interesting take on his epileptic episodes. He believed they were more than just medical issues. They were eye-opening revelations. He thought of them as moments that allowed him to tap into a higher truth, similar to how prophets in ancient times received messages from the heavens. He imagined these episodes were like an ancient prophetic channel, where epilepsy was the bridge for divine ideas to enter human consciousness. This wasn't some silly superstition. It was his thoughtful reflection on how altered states of consciousness might reveal hidden realities. Surprisingly, current research supports his view, indicating that the brain regions activated during temporal lobe epilepsy are the same ones linked to deep spiritual encounters, religious visions, and prophetic-like states in various cultures. Long before science caught on, Dostoevsky sensed that his condition naturally tapped into the brain's capacity for spiritual insight. During those seizures, what he experienced felt similar to what mystics all around the world talked about, like a sense of being beyond time, feeling one with the universe, and grasping a profound wisdom of life. These experiences echoed the teachings of Christian mystics, Hindu gurus, Buddhist monks, and Islamic Sufis. But what made Dostoevsky stand out was how he could talk about these mystical insights in a way that made sense during his era, especially as society started focusing more on machines and less on the divine. His vision served as a link that connected traditional spiritual teachings with the emerging psychological concepts of his time. Interestingly, Dostoevsky's visions also gave him sneaky peeks into where society was heading, both in Russia and beyond in the West. During these episodes, he didn't just brush against age-old truths. He also sensed hints of future events. He foresaw things like the rise of socialism, the decline in religious belief, and the empty spiritual space left by an overly materialistic culture. He figured out the dangers of dismissing eternal consciousness, warning it could lead to nihilism, oppression, and a life focused solely on the physical. These insights weren't lucky guesses. They stemmed from his deep understanding of fundamental forces driving historical change. For Dostoevsky, the link between a person's mind and universal wisdom was crucial in understanding prophetic experiences. He believed that prophets weren't just getting messages from somewhere out there. They were tapping into a part of their own minds that connects with universal understanding. Divine insights occur when someone's awareness transcends its ordinary limits and communes with the cosmic consciousness. This explains why prophetic wisdom often seems to arise from beyond personal knowledge, yet profoundly reflects the prophet's inherent nature. Thus, the prophet becomes a voice for this eternal consciousness, sharing its deeper insights and meaning with the world. But of course, sharing these profound insights wasn't exactly straightforward, much like Dostoevsky's struggle to articulate his epileptic visions. When you're gifted with a revelation, you get a direct certainty that often goes beyond words and usual thinking. Yet, to share it, you have to use language that everyone else can understand. This can muddle the message, leading to misunderstandings and misinterpretations that tend to follow in the wake of authentic prophetic visions. Dostoevsky faced the challenge of communicating these transformative insights by weaving them into his stories, hoping readers would feel these moments rather than just read about them as dry theories. The tricky thing about prophetic wisdom is figuring out if it's the real deal or just someone's breakdown, since both involve altered states of mind and claims of superior understanding. So, Dostoevsky thought that when someone truly has a prophetic vision, you'll see it in their positive behavior changes, like they start thinking more clearly, acting more kindly, and suddenly becoming more creative. When people get the genuine insight, it boosts them up, leads to kindness, deeper wisdom, and incredible art. But when people get caught up in fake stuff, it makes them fanatical, morally confused, and even harmful, which shows they're missing the real point. Now, mixing these prophetic ideas with historical revelations is a pretty tricky task. If people can just tap into some deep universal truths by thinking about them, what does that say about those ancient traditions claiming they have the exclusive rights to those truths? Dostoevsky believed those age-old messages were originally meant to keep prophetic insights fresh and hand them down through generations. However, as time went on, these messages often got muddled with politics and strict rules, losing their true essence. A genuinely spiritual life involves respecting those old teachings, but also finding a personal connection to that eternal wisdom where all true insights originate. On a larger scale, Dostoevsky described prophetic consciousness as something like a spiritual health check for society. It's about identifying the underlying spiritual trends that guide history. Prophets, according to him, weren't just about revealing timeless truths. They were showing how those truths were relevant in their specific time and place. Acting like the spiritual healers of society, prophets identified where people were veering off spiritually and offered solutions to reconnect them with eternal wisdom. This meant they were deeply involved in daily life, but also had the ability to see the broader perspective. Essentially, prophetic consciousness became a selfless quest to bridge the gap between timeless truths and the way we live our lives. In Part 7, we're diving into the topic of free will and determinism, but with a Dostoevsky twist. Thanks to his epilepsy experiences, he viewed time and consciousness in a way that turned typical debates upside down. We usually think of time as a straight line, right? The past influences the future, and we make choices along that path. But Dostoevsky offered a different take, a vision where every moment is equally real and exists all at once. From this timeless perspective, your life isn't just a string of cause and effect moments. It's more like a huge pattern that your consciousness selected even before you entered what we think of as a linear experience. This view steps outside the usual free will versus determinism debate by positioning choice as something that happens beyond time as we know it. And so, he came up with what we might call the eternal choice theory. Think of it like this. Your consciousness chooses your entire life's path from a place outside of time. It's not a decision made in the past. It's a choice from a timeless space of consciousness. This means each person has chosen the whole mix of situations, relationships, highs, and lows in order to explore the endless facets of being conscious. That includes not only the good parts, but also suffering and even moral failings, as they're all part of achieving complete self-awareness. This doesn't mean we're off the hook for our actions, though. Instead, it stretches personal responsibility to cover our whole life structure, not just our day-to-day decisions. It offers a new angle on moral responsibility that avoids the pitfall of thinking we're mere puppets, or that we have boundless freedom. On the everyday level, we still make choices between right and wrong, and those choices carry real consequences. But from this eternal viewpoint, our consciousness has already picked out these moral challenges as ways to grow and understand itself better. If someone messes up, they're accountable at the ground level. Yet, they also represent this eternal consciousness grappling with moral failure and possibly redemption. Psychologically speaking, eternal choice theory shakes up how we think about identity and personal development. If your consciousness picked your life, then that includes your personality and habits. What you assume is just how you are is really something your eternal self chose, for reasons that only make sense from that broader perspective. This mindset opens up possibilities for change that you might not consider if you were only thinking linearly. It turns shifting your character into more than just a mental change. It becomes a spiritual awakening to your true self. When it comes to evil, it calls for a complete rethink. If consciousness opts to go through the bad stuff, maybe that's because it plays an important part in the grand scheme. Dostoevsky suggested that truly understanding goodness requires knowing evil. To appreciate love, you need to experience hate. To value justice, you've got to encounter injustice. Evil, then, isn't just a cosmic mistake, but a critical step in consciousness's journey of self-discovery. So, this idea doesn't excuse bad actions or give wrongdoers a way out. Instead, it offers a bigger picture where our notions of right and wrong unfold. This eternal choice concept really changes the game in terms of healing and personal growth. Normally, therapy suggests our issues arise from past traumas or mental misfires, needing various interventions to fix. But what if your life's ups and downs were experiences your consciousness actually chose? That suggests our mental struggles might not be random misfortunes, but significant parts of our journey to understand life. Healing might then focus less on fixing problems and more on grasping what these challenges teach us on a deeper level. Instead of focusing solely on mental health recovery, it's about engaging with the greater purpose your life was designed for. When we view society and politics through the idea of this eternal choice, it prompts us to rethink our duties and justice in the community. If each person supposedly picked their place and era, one might assume this means we should accept things as they stand, even when they're unfair. However, Dostoevsky saw it differently. He believed that acknowledging we've chosen to encounter life's unfair challenges actually encourages us to strive harder for justice. Not because we can wipe out unfairness entirely, but because the effort towards fairness is a spiritual journey on its own. Therefore, taking part in social issues isn't just activism. It allows our consciousness to serve higher goals by addressing real-world challenges. When it comes to learning and education, this eternal choice idea suggests that we need to change how we think about growth and knowledge. If a soul chose its life, it also chose all the lessons and obstacles along the way. So, education shouldn't just focus on handing down facts and skills, but should also help people realize and pursue the spiritual missions they've chosen to engage with. The aim isn't purely about becoming proficient in things, but about connecting with the larger creative process that living entails. This means that educational systems should combine practical skills with spiritual development, as both are crucial to awakening our true conscious selves. Part 8. The Politics of Eternal Consciousness. Dostoevsky came up with a political philosophy that stood out from the norms of his day, questioning both conservative and revolutionary socialist ideas. Through his intense epileptic moments, he started to see individuals as temporary vessels of a universal consciousness, each influenced by their societal roles and historical contexts. This perspective raised challenging questions for political theory, suggesting personal responsibility for one's life, while also hinting at a unity that surpasses social divides. He pictured a kind of transcendental politics, which combined tackling current social issues with understanding their timeless nature. For Dostoevsky, politics was more about spiritual development than just seeking material benefits or changing institutions. He criticized revolutionary socialism for its materialistic take on human nature and society. These movements aimed to build ideal societies by drastically changing economic and political frameworks, assuming that people's thoughts and actions were totally molded by their material surroundings. However, Dostoevsky's insight into an eternal consciousness indicated that there were elements of human nature no external system could absolutely control. The drive to construct a perfect society through material changes alone risked becoming oppressive, stripping away the fundamental freedom central to human essence. True social advancement called for recognizing the eternal aspects of human consciousness, rather than just material elements. Dostoevsky's critique of conservative traditionalism was equally pointed, but more nuanced. Social hierarchies often reflected genuine differences in spiritual and cultural development, which deserved acknowledgement. Yet, when these structures became rigid and stifled human potential, they conflicted with the essence of spiritual life. According to him, true conservatism should preserve what encourages the unfolding of consciousness, but remain open to changes for timeless purposes. The measure for judging any social system was whether it promoted or hindered conscious engagement in the ongoing process of eternal becoming. From these insights, Dostoevsky developed the notion of spiritual democracy, his alternative to both revolutionary and conservative views. This spiritual democracy honored the inherent equality of all humans as embodiments of eternal consciousness, seeing spiritual and cultural differences as temporary. Political systems should enable exploration of consciousness's limitless potential, while maintaining social unity and cultural continuity. Achieving this balance required aligning personal freedom with communal responsibility and valuing spiritual depth while upholding human dignity. Democracy, thus, became a spiritual endeavor where society collectively pursued the growth of consciousness. In this context, understanding the role of government meant closely examining the relationship between temporal power and eternal truths. States had their place in maintaining social order and providing services beyond individual reach. However, their authority turned unjust when they tried to control the spiritual domain or reduce human life to mere material concerns. The true role of government was to foster an environment where individuals could pursue spiritual growth while contributing positively to the collective good. To get things running smoothly, you needed solid institutions and the understanding that government power needs something more than just laws to keep it in check. The whole concept of law and justice took on a new look thanks to the idea of eternal consciousness. Legal systems were designed to keep folks in line and protect them from harm caused by others. True justice, though, was about sticking to eternal principles that went beyond plain old laws or specific organizations. Ultimately, everyone was responsible for their own journey through life, choosing it as a path to explore their own consciousness. Justice wasn't just about laying down the law. It was about fixing, teaching, and helping individuals see the deeper spiritual meaning in what they did and chose. When we talk about the economics in the context of eternal consciousness, both capitalism and socialism hit some rough patches. Capitalism, with its push for personal achievement and wealth, could serve a spiritual role when it encouraged growth and creativity. It turned sour, though, when it valued people solely by their economic output, or led to massive inequalities that blocked folks from exploring their consciousness. On the other hand, socialism's focus on collective care and economic fairness matched up with spiritual values of compassion and shared responsibility. But it ran into problems when it squashed individual drive or insisted on everyone being materially the same, overlooking personal spiritual growth and unique contributions. On the global stage, eternal consciousness introduced fresh perspectives for dealing with conflicts and cooperating worldwide. When we view nations and cultures as parts of a universal consciousness, exploring what it means to be human, international conflicts become consciousness having a conversation with itself. This perspective doesn't erase the reality of clashing national interests or justify aggressive acts. What it offers is a way to look at disagreements as opportunities to learn, rather than mere contests with winners and losers. True peace comes from recognizing our spiritual unity beyond political divides and embracing cultural differences as signs of consciousness's limitless creativity. Seen in this way, international relations evolve into a collective spiritual practice, a route for humanity to engage in the worldwide awakening of consciousness itself. In Part 9, the focus shifts to how Dostoevsky's battles with epilepsy profoundly influenced the way he saw Christian faith and the embodiment of Christ. These intense episodes brought him to a place where he could fathom the union of divine and human elements in a single being. Dostoevsky began to view Christ not merely as a historical figure with both divine and human traits, but as the ultimate epitome of what human consciousness can achieve. To him, Christ signified eternal awareness manifesting within time, yet never severing its connection with the divine, serving as an unmatched example for everyone's spiritual evolution. Dostoevsky's perception of Christ's crucifixion changed dramatically. He saw it as a profound demonstration of how consciousness chooses to fully engage with the trials of earthly life. Rather than seeing Christ's suffering only as a sacrifice for sin or fulfilling divine justice, It underscored eternal consciousness, embracing all facets of life, from physical pain to emotional struggles, and even feeling abandoned by God. The anguished cry from the cross, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" symbolized eternal awareness, becoming entirely present in the now, enduring its inevitable suffering. Still, this wasn't seen as a defeat, but as a victory, proving that consciousness retains its essence even when it seems detached from its eternal source. The resurrection further demonstrated that consciousness is beyond time and even death. Dostoevsky also reevaluated his understanding of the Holy Spirit through his epileptic experiences, where he sensed an expanded consciousness and divine insight. To him, the Holy Spirit wasn't a distinct being, but eternal consciousness showing itself in our temporal world during moments of spiritual clarity and heightened awareness. His epileptic episodes provided him access to the same consciousness perfectly embodied in Christ. This perspective opened up the possibility that mystical experiences and prophetic visions are accessible to anyone, not just during special occasions or reserved for select individuals. The Holy Spirit was now seen as a constant presence of eternal awareness that could be personally accessed, sidestepping traditional religious structures. His concept of salvation underwent a significant transformation, moving away from the idea of escaping a fallen world to recognizing one's eternal identity. While traditional Christian doctrine often portrayed salvation as a divine rescue leading to life after death, Dostoevsky believed salvation was about freeing consciousness from its limited temporal focus. Salvation was about recognizing one's eternal nature and purposefully engaging with the continuous creative processes at play in the world. Such awakening could emerge through everyday life rather than seeking otherworldly realms. Sin, too, was reframed as a transient disconnect from one's eternal consciousness rather than a fundamental flaw in human nature. Sin wasn't about breaking sacred laws, but occurred when consciousness operated from a limited, temporal viewpoint instead of its eternal base. This reimagining of sin offered an explanation for its prevalence among all humans. To sum it up, we're all kind of stuck viewing life from a narrow angle, like looking through a small tube. It's a normal part of being human and doesn't change our true nature of consciousness or awareness. Redemption isn't really about looking for forgiveness from some divine figure because we messed up. It's more about realizing who we are at our core, beyond just the physical body we're in. When it comes to what Jesus did, it's not that he was settling our accounts for us, but he showed us how you can live being fully aware of the eternal truths, even while on earth. Eternal life? It's not about living endlessly like we usually think. It's this new awareness that's beyond time, beyond being born and dying. Here's the thing. Anyone can tap into this life right this moment just by having a spiritual awakening. It's not some prize you grab after you die. Think about Dostoevsky. During his intense seizures, he had moments where he felt a sense of this timeless awareness, almost like he was touching eternity, throwing the idea of eternal life as endless existence out the window. In this sense, death isn't the end. It's more a shift in how we're conscious because true awareness isn't something that can be stamped out by anything time-related. So, what does all this mean for the church? Well, churches and religions are great for keeping spiritual lessons alive, offering community support, and preserving cultures. But things get tricky when they start claiming they're the only way to divine truth, or when they turn spirituality into just going through the motions with rituals and dogma. The real essence isn't about joining a particular church or religious group. It's about being part of a larger circle of people who understand that there's something eternal in each of us. Now, living a genuinely religious life does mean engaging in traditional practices, but it also involves directly connecting with this eternal consciousness. Dostoevsky's visions push us to rethink the end times not as some big dramatic scene, but as this gradual, almost hidden shift in human awareness, waking us up to our timeless essence. The kingdom of heaven isn't a far-off future. It's here, available through connecting with eternal truths. As for the idea of Christ coming back, it's not literally about him showing up again in history. It's more about waking up this Christ-like awareness within each of us. Humanity is slowly moving toward a shared understanding of our timeless consciousness, even if it's a long, soul-searching journey that involves suffering. The aim? It's not about escaping our earthly lives, but radically transforming them by living with this awareness of timeless truth. Part 10. Dostoevsky was a mastermind when it came to weaving his intense, epileptic experiences into his stories. He had these really profound spiritual realizations and wanted to share them with everyone. But he knew that simply talking about it would never really capture their depth. If he went all philosophical about them, it would strip away their boundless essence. So, he chose to tell stories instead. Stories catch us totally. They speak to our imagination and emotions, and not just to the logical side of our brains. In his books, Dostoevsky liked to explore how eternal consciousness meets our day-to-day reality through different backdrops, mental, social, or spiritual scenes. Each main character tackles the age-old question: how do you live authentically when you're balancing eternal truths against everyday constraints? Dostoevsky's thing was polyphonic storytelling, where every character has their distinct, well-developed perspective. This style showed his belief that consciousness is naturally diverse and full of conversation. It's like during his epileptic fits, he tapped into some universal consciousness where all viewpoints coexist. His novels let readers see one situation from these different angles, revealing the richness and beauty in eternal truths being filtered through varied life experiences. This approach let him explore deep philosophical ideas way better than any dry, formal essay could. Take The Idiot and Prince Myshkin, for example. He's Dostoevsky's way of illustrating a person deeply in touch with eternal consciousness, trying to live a regular life. Myshkin's epilepsy gives him moments of transcendent experience, much like what Dostoevsky felt. But the story dives into the mess and heartache that occur when someone tries to live by eternal values in a world obsessed with fleeting, superficial stuff. His pure-heartedness makes social interactions a minefield of manipulation and psychological complexity. Ultimately, his retreat into mental chaos isn't about him failing. It's about the difficulty of bringing deep spiritual truths into alignment with societal norms. It's like Dostoevsky is questioning whether eternal consciousness can ever really flourish within the confines of everyday life. Then there's Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, This dude gets lost in logic and materialism, cutting himself off from those eternal ideas. His crime is almost inevitable when seeing human life as just a series of mechanical and calculated actions, ignoring moral truths. The inner turmoil he suffers after the murder is his conscience rebelling against actions that deny its true nature, despite what his rational mind says. It's love for Sonia that pulls him back, demonstrating how relationships grounded in eternal values can reawaken someone's true essence. The story follows his journey from being lost through a crisis to a spiritual rebirth. And The Brothers Karamazov is like Dostoevsky's grand exploration of how different folks deal with eternal truths amidst life's everyday challenges. Ivan struggles with divine justice because his mind demands logical evidence instead of taking faith at face value. Meanwhile, Dmitri indulges in life's pleasures, but still clings to deeper spiritual meanings. Alyosha is this character who manages to keep hold of eternal truths while being totally present in his everyday world and engaged with those around him. Father Zosima is a character who's reached a spiritual wisdom that allows him to help others discover their true, everlasting selves, while not shying away from real-world dilemmas. One of Dostoevsky's most insightful portrayals of the clash between organized religion and genuine spiritual experience is found in the Grand Inquisitor chapter. The Inquisitor, a powerful religious figure, doesn't trust people to find spiritual connection on their own anymore. Instead, he believes in making them content through control, rather than helping them discover an inner eternal truth. Christ's silent response of a kiss to the Inquisitor's criticism symbolizes how timeless spiritual consciousness views earthly power, claiming to act for spiritual good while doing the opposite. This part of the narrative exposes how religious groups can obstruct authentic spiritual lives when they stray from their fundamental mission of engaging with higher realities, marking it as one of the strongest critiques against Christian institutions. The underground man is depicted as someone who sees the flaws in purely logical and material views, but struggles to find alternative meanings and purposes. His complex mind brings attention to the issues of viewing human nature too narrowly, but his isolation and bitterness highlight the dangers of becoming disconnected from spiritual roots and meaningful human relationships. He almost predicts existentialist thinkers who would later explore themes of alienation and authentic living in a modern world. Dostoevsky's writing goes deeper, showing that this existential battle isn't just about psychological or social problems. It's truly about craving higher truths that cannot be fulfilled by worldly answers alone. In his works, Dostoevsky uses dream sequences significantly, enabling characters to step beyond the confines of time and reason to face their deepest spiritual challenges and opportunities in a symbolic way. Through these dreams, characters like Raskolnikov, Dmitri Karamazov, and the underground man tap into parts of their minds that regular narration can't capture. These scenes reflect what it's like to experience moments where the mind breaks past normal boundaries, accessing deeper truths. For readers, these dream sequences open a window into that broader perspective, helping them grasp spiritual insights even if they've never experienced such shifts in consciousness themselves. Part 11. Picture this. In 1849, Dostoevsky stood before a firing squad, utterly convinced this was it, that his time on earth was almost up. And that moment turned his whole perception of time and consciousness upside down. He suddenly felt like every second stretched on forever, reminiscent of the sensations he experienced just before his epileptic fits, but with a new kind of weight, a real sense of finality, and perhaps a peek into what lies beyond. It was like he was beginning to think of death, not as the end of everything, but as a doorway to someplace else. The conviction settled in him that our core consciousness doesn't simply vanish when our body calls it quits. Living through this ordeal left a lasting impression on his views about death, shaping it as more of a passage than a stopping point. It was like he saw his entire life all at once, unlike the disjointed bits we usually reflect on. While standing there, he had this overwhelming sense like his past, present, and future weren't separated like pages in a book. Instead, they all blended together seamlessly. He even tossed around the idea that death might not steal away our memories. Rather, it could expand them beyond the usual timelines we adhere to. As he teetered on the brink of what seemed like the end, a surge of deep compassion washed over him, an emotion not clouded by sentimentality, but driven by a profound understanding of the interconnectedness of everything alive. Love, he realized, wasn't just some nice notion. It was fundamental to how everything existed. To Dostoevsky, every person was a temporary vessel for an everlasting consciousness to experience the world. From an intellectual standpoint, this close encounter with death answered some of life's oldest puzzles for him. He realized truths about existence, suffering, and the dance between good and evil, not through logic, but through an intuitive grasp beyond words. He didn't need theories or debates to understand. He just knew. This enlightenment showed him that real wisdom doesn't come from books or lectures. It springs from the truths nestled inside our consciousness. This brush with the brink also altered how he viewed ethics and spirituality. If consciousness goes on after death, then our actions and spiritual growth ripple outward, reaching beyond the tangible present into infinity. So, how we behave morally and spiritually matters far more than what we see on this earthly plane. Dostoevsky's reflections weren't about heavenly rewards or hellish punishments. Instead, he imagined an internal trial happening as you faced your mortality, a moment where everything you've ever done stood as clear as day. It was what he described as a moment of absolute moral clarity, where you instantly grasp the full ethical weight of your choices, with no one else judging you. This realization brought on both ultimate accountability and boundless compassion, seeing even your missteps as having spiritual significance. This understanding of death gave him new insights into traditional religious ideas around judgment, resurrection, and eternal life. Death, for him, wasn't about some otherworldly journey. It was a realization that eternity has always been here, intertwined with our existence. Heaven and hell weren't literal places, but states of being, shaped by how we grow spiritually and choose morally. Resurrection wasn't a return to physical life, but the discovery of the timeless aspect of oneself, untouched by life's end, like death itself. These insights transformed abstract religious doctrines into tangible spiritual truths, accessible through a sharper awareness. Dostoevsky faced the same challenge, trying to convey this as he did when attempting to articulate the vivid insights he experienced during his epileptic fits. Language just doesn't cut it, because it's designed to make distinctions that this near-death perspective blends together. Trying to articulate it risks losing the heart of the experience. So, rather than launching into philosophy, he ingeniously incorporated these insights into his novels, igniting a deep spiritual recognition among his readers. In his books, characters on the brink of death often undergo profound transformations that mirror his thoughts on consciousness after life. These concepts of consciousness in death also shed new light on how to handle dying and grieving. If death was just a shift in awareness rather than a final end, it opened up pathways for genuine meaning and comfort that weren't available in purely materialistic views. However, there was a need for a careful balance between true spiritual insight and offering false solace that overlooks the pain of loss. Dostoevsky's outlook didn't shy away from the reality of loss. Instead, it highlighted an eternal connection that transcends physical death. It wasn't so much about seeing death as an end, but more as a progression to the next phase in an ongoing journey of self-discovery. Part 12. Dostoevsky's experiences with epilepsy throw a fascinating light on just how complex memory is, stepping away from the straightforward ideas traditional psychology often holds. When he encountered his epileptic episodes, he spoke about accessing more than just personal memories. He talked about what he called a cosmic memory, a colossal reservoir of human experiences extending far beyond any single person's life. This hinted at memory being more than just a record of past events. It was like a link to an overarching awareness that encompassed all of human consciousness. Each person's memory was like a unique perspective on this cosmic memory, generally limited by personal life, but sometimes it could expand beyond those everyday bounds. For Dostoevsky, these episodes momentarily lifted these limits, letting him dive into deeper parts of memory that interconnected his personal awareness with a broader human experience. His memory during these epileptic moments seemed to flip usual concepts of time upside down. Things from the past felt as vivid and real as anything happening in the now, and future possibilities were as clear as memories of days gone by. The distinct lines we usually draw between what's past and what's yet to come blurred into one seamless awareness, which he termed eternal memory. This was a kind of consciousness that perceived time as an unending continuum. It hinted that our normal way of slicing time into past, present, and future might actually protect us from an overwhelming full awareness of time. These epileptic experiences lifted that protective veil, allowing him to experience a natural state of timeless consciousness. These experiences also led to a radical rethinking of how memory ties into our personal identity. Generally, we think of who we are as a chain of memories connecting through time, where the person who lived a moment is the same one reminiscing about it now. But Dostoevsky's brush with universal memory suggested that personal identity was far more expansive and flexible than this continuous memory model suggests. He talked about recalling experiences from lives he hadn't lived, touching on memories not rooted in his background, pointing towards a deeper level of identity that included but also went well beyond personal life narratives. A universal consciousness showing itself through individuals. Emotionally speaking, this expansive view of memory posed some pretty profound questions for psychology. Dostoevsky didn't just catch glimpses of universal memories, he felt the emotions tied to them too, simultaneously experiencing all the happiness and sorrow ever felt by human beings. This wasn't merely understanding human emotions on an intellectual level, it was directly feeling the full scope of them all. He described it as sensing the tears of everyone who'd ever wept and the laughter of everyone who'd ever laughed. This might help explain his exceptional ability to write characters with such real, layered emotions. On a cognitive level, this notion of eternal memory gave Dostoevsky brand new insights into learning and knowing. If consciousness could tap into universal memory, then learning wasn't about just collecting new information. Instead, it was like uncovering knowledge already there, hidden deep within consciousness. Education then became about awakening to ever-present truths, rather than merely acquiring facts from others. This idea explained why some concepts seemed instantly familiar, even when you encountered them for the first time, and why truly getting something felt more like recognizing it than discovering it. The teacher's role shifted from cramming students with information to awakening them to knowledge they already unknowingly possessed. Dostoevsky's understanding of where artistic inspiration came from and his craft of writing took on new dimensions, thanks to his widened view on memory. Dostoevsky's stories weren't just spun from his life or imagination, but from his unique knack for tapping into humanity's shared experiences through his epilepsy. Characters like Raskolnikov, Prince Mishkin, and Ivan Karamazov felt filled with deep psychological layers because Dostoevsky accessed memories of experiences he'd never directly had. For him, making art meant digging out memories and shedding light on the common human experiences usually lurking beneath the surface. This is why great literature manages to reveal truths about being human that readers understand, even if they've never thought about them before. The concept of expanded memory brought new ways to deal with mental healing and overcoming trauma. If the mind could connect with universal memory, personal scars could be placed within the wider context of how people generally endure and recover. It wasn't about dismissing personal pain, but understanding its place in the wider human saga of struggle and recovery. The goal wasn't to erase bad memories, but to blend personal history with the broader human journey of development. Pondering infinite memory shakes up our basic ideas about how consciousness and time tie together. If memories could go beyond the seeming limits of sequential time and personal experience, then maybe our consciousness itself had parts that outstripped temporal boundaries. Memory became evidence of the infinite nature of consciousness, rather than just a way to recall the past. The ability to revisit moments from humanity's past suggested that consciousness thrived in a timeless realm where all experiences coexisted. This perspective echoed Dostoevsky's metaphysical belief that eternal consciousness was the essence of reality, with our time-bound experiences just a small piece of the puzzle. Part 13: Eastern Wisdom and Western Revelation. Comparative Mystical Experience. We explore how Dostoevsky's experiences with epilepsy mirrored elements of Eastern mysticism, drawing parallels with Hindu and Buddhist beliefs. He described an expansion of consciousness, which parallels the Hindu idea of the Atman merging with Brahman, or the Buddhist pursuit of transcending ordinary, time-bound awareness. Dostoevsky viewed this broader awareness from a Russian Orthodox Christian perspective, crafting a unique mix of mystical experiences without abandoning his Christian faith. This showed that profound spiritual insights could enhance Christian thought without tossing aside Western religious roots. His perspective on suffering and universal awareness resonated with the Buddhist concept of dukkha, which views suffering as inherent to life. However, unlike Buddhism, which often urges one to transcend suffering through detachment from worldly life, Dostoevsky found value in embracing suffering as a means to delve into the depths of consciousness. His characters didn't try to shy away from life's challenges. Instead, they sought deeper understanding within them. He believed suffering wasn't a hindrance, but a way to grasp consciousness's boundless nature. When it came to karma, Dostoevsky differed from the usual notion that past actions shape current experiences. Instead, he believed consciousness made decisions from a timeless standpoint, influencing entire life paths. This perspective reshaped karma as not about past deeds, but about timeless choices, blending responsibility with compassion and dismissing the idea that unfair situations were just fate or deserved punishment. Dostoevsky's Seizures offered insights similar to those sought through meditation and spiritual practices. Through these episodes, he inadvertently accessed the kind of awareness meditation tries to achieve. He proposed that the goal of meditation isn't to reach a distinct state, but to realize this ever-present timeless consciousness under everyday awareness. Meditation becomes a way to tap into and assimilate enlightening insights, not about gaining powers or escaping daily life. Finally, his take raised intriguing ideas about reincarnation. Traditional teachings often depict a soul evolving through multiple lives, accumulating experience and wisdom over time. Yet, if timeless experiences exist all at once, consciousness doesn't wander through time as we perceive it. It instead appears across different moments simultaneously. What we see as past or future lives are actually varied expressions of a timeless consciousness, each exploring different human potentials. This might explain why some people feel a deep connection to eras or cultures they've never encountered. In a way, their consciousness participates in all human experiences. Dostoevsky saw personal spiritual awakening as linked to societal transformation. While Eastern philosophies often emphasize personal liberation by withdrawing from societal ties, Dostoevsky argued the opposite. He believed diving deep into social interactions was vital for spiritual growth. Recognizing eternal consciousness heightened one's duty to strive for justice and aid in the world. Instead of avoiding worldly affairs, one was to engage with them more profoundly, all the while acknowledging eternal truths. Dostoevsky came up with a fresh take on spiritual guidance or mentorship that was quite different from the usual methods. He didn't just stick to the classic relationship between teacher and student or the confines of established spiritual systems. Instead, he conveyed profound experiences through his stories. His books served as a form of spiritual learning, appealing to readers' imaginations rather than simply laying out teachings or guiding them through meditation. This approach made discovering spiritual insights something anyone could do. No need for special training or ties to a particular group. People could delve into deep spiritual truths through his tales, much like they would from traditional spiritual practices. By intertwining mystical experiences with intellectual and creative endeavors, Dostoevsky diverged from Eastern philosophies, which might sometimes view thinking and creating as obstacles to spiritual journeys. Despite his epileptic seizures, his philosophical insights and artistic contributions grew richer. He showed that achieving spiritual enlightenment could complement engaging with thoughts and culture. The goal was not to eliminate thinking and art, but to reshape them, recognizing every act as a continuous creation where humans are actively involved. 14. In Part 14, we're diving into the world of German idealism and its exploration of deeper experiences, especially through how Fyodor Dostoevsky dealt with his epileptic episodes. Dostoevsky's personal experiences seem to echo and confirm some of the major ideas laid out by German idealist philosophers. Take Hegel's concept of the absolute spirit developing through time, or Schelling's belief that nature is a way for infinite consciousness to show itself. These thinkers were all about how consciousness evolves to eventually connect with an ultimate reality. But while Hegel explored this with logical frameworks and historical context, Dostoevsky took a more practical approach. He wasn't just philosophizing, he actually felt these heightened states of awareness through his seizures. Dostoevsky added a real-world angle to these pretty lofty philosophical ideas. Instead of just imagining consciousness as a bridge beyond space and time, he literally felt it during his seizures. This kind of real experience gave weight to what philosophers often only wrote about theoretically. It wasn't just theory, it was lived reality. He showed that philosophical ideas could hold up through personal experience rather than only fitting into complex arguments. When you consider the relationship between individual human awareness and a vast infinite consciousness, Dostoevsky's experiences mirrored Schelling's thoughts on nature. Just before a seizure, his own awareness seemed to connect with something universal, tying together all moments in time. It blurred the personal and the universal, challenging philosophical divisions that had existed since Descartes. So here we see consciousness as something both intensely personal and cosmically universal. This feeling of merging with reality lends support to the idealist notion that consciousness and reality are essentially one, a concept that can seem a bit abstract when just argued theoretically. Dostoevsky's experiences also brought new insights to Kant's ideas. Kant saw space and time not as external realities, but as mental frameworks. Dostoevsky extended this, showing through his own experiences that consciousness might have abilities beyond what Kant imagined. What's amazing about Dostoevsky's experiences is how they pointed out the potential for consciousness to transcend typical limits of space and time, yet still be grounded in daily life. It suggests a way of knowing that's not just about combining perception with logic, but truly engaging in the creative process of forming both perception and thought. This reflection on consciousness even hints at what Husserl and other phenomenologists would later delve into. Dostoevsky's detailed descriptions of his altered states provided a map of awareness that suggested subjective experience holds deep philosophical value alongside traditional scientific examination. When Dostoevsky felt the aura of his epilepsy, he found himself in a rare mental state that let him explore parts of consciousness typically hidden in everyday life. His writing vividly captured these experiences, guiding readers on their own quests to uncover similar layers of consciousness. The age-old challenge of understanding the world as it truly is, a question that puzzled Kant and other German philosophers, gets a new twist thanks to Dostoevsky's lived experiences. During those moments, he felt like he was plugged straight into reality, with those usual perception filters set aside. It was like his consciousness had slipped through the usual walls, dividing subject from object, opening a rare window onto reality's core. It made you think that maybe those things in themselves we always thought were beyond grasp could actually be reached by just tweaking the way our minds are set. Dostoevsky's episodes gave a sense of consciousness breaking free from its regular chains, sipping straight from the source of ultimate truth, a place where idealist philosophy proposed the deepest truths resided. These experiences seemed to crack the puzzles that German idealism couldn't fully solve. Hegel's map of consciousness moving toward complete understanding found a breathing example in Dostoevsky's stories of characters wrestling with both narrowed and limitless views of the world. In his works, consciousness grew and found itself, much like Hegel's concept of spirit, yet it always stayed tied to real human emotions and the tangled web of social norms. Look at Ivan Karamazov, who's all about the rational mind searching out logical answers to life's big questions, or Alyosha, who blended finite and infinite perspectives so seamlessly. Their battles and interactions brought to life consciousness's journey as it tries to understand itself. Dostoevsky taught us that it's not just about thinking through idealist philosophies. You could live them, feel them on both emotional and imaginative levels. His novels took big ideas and made them almost touchable, wrapping universal truths in stories that anyone could grasp, both in their hearts and minds. Reading his books was a bit like experiencing the enlightenment his seizures unveiled, an art just as rich as philosophy or mysticism. Literature became a unique guide, gently steering consciousness toward its depths through creativity instead of just logic. When it came to the political messages in German idealism, especially Hegel's idea that history unfolds as divine understanding develops over time, Dostoevsky offered a critical angle. Although he agreed with the idealists that the heart of reality was spiritual rather than physical, he was quick to shoot down any idea that linked a political system to achieving humanity's spiritual goal. He believed anyone could tap into eternal consciousness, no matter their social standing, meaning you didn't need to wait for historical milestones to reach it. This view didn't bank everything on major political breakthroughs, but upheld social justice as a way to show spiritual awareness, not as a way to achieve it. The focus was on staying mindful of eternal truths, rather than establishing perfect systems that might make personal spiritual growth irrelevant. Part 15. The Psychology of Spiritual Transformation. Dostoevsky knew a thing or two about epilepsy, and it gave him a unique window into how the mind can undergo profound spiritual shifts. He figured out that real spiritual change isn't something you can just decide to do or have someone else decide for you. It needs to come from within. Through his experiences, he learned that these personal shifts require alterations deep within the very fabrics of our awareness. His epileptic experiences revealed that different layers of consciousness could be accessed, layers that we typically don't reach in our everyday state of mind. This led him to a sort of transformational psychology, where he explored how the mind could break free from its usual boundaries to delve deeper into its own nature. This kind of transformation wasn't about ditching our usual state of consciousness. It was more about expanding our awareness to tap into a sense of timelessness, adding fresh perspectives to our daily lives. Dostoevsky's experiences with epilepsy highlighted the concept of psychological death and rebirth, crucial for any significant spiritual evolution. In each epileptic episode, his ordinary self-awareness would crumble temporarily, only to be rebuilt with fresh insights from those moments of transcendence. This process was often brutal, requiring him to let go of familiar views of himself and his world, with no guarantee the new outlook would make everything better. His stories often reflect these themes, with characters undergoing similar dramas of psychological collapse and rebirth. Take Raskolnikov, for instance. After his crime, his old identity falls apart, forcing him to reconstruct his self-image on a foundation of spiritual, rather than just logical, principles. This shows that real spiritual growth often involves a kind of breakdown that can't just be sidestepped by careful planning or small steps. Dostoevsky believed that suffering was a key player in this spiritual transformation game. He thought that sometimes a deep shakeup was needed for consciousness to access deeper levels of awareness. Suffering wasn't just some kind of punishment or meaningless pain. It was a way to bust through the rigid mindsets that kept consciousness from seeing its true self. This realization didn't mean that suffering was inherently good or justified causing pain, but it did explain why major spiritual insights often come out of life's harsh realities, rather than being in spite of them. The real trick was learning how to deal with suffering consciously, neither just enduring it passively, nor trying to dodge it altogether. Dostoevsky knew this from experience and used his writing to explore it further. His epileptic auras gave him glimpses of cosmic awareness and universal truth, but the challenge was figuring out how to blend these insights into the day-to-day grind and social life. Staying connected to eternal truths while still being effective in the here and now was no small feat. Characters like Prince Myshkin highlight these challenges, showing how over-focus on the transcendent can leave a person socially isolated and ineffective. Successfully managing these perspectives involved cultivating what Dostoevsky called double consciousness, the ability to engage both eternal and temporal viewpoints without losing your grip on reality or practicality. The connection between psychological troubles and spiritual insights was a complex puzzle, and Dostoevsky tackled it by carefully examining states of altered consciousness. Dealing with epilepsy was tough for him. It was a real medical issue that caused pain and limited what he could do. Yet, oddly enough, it also gave him access to spiritual insights that regular states of mind couldn't quite touch. This experience muddied the waters between what we think of as mental health and mental illness, more than what you'd typically hear from a psychologist. There's this idea that sometimes when the mind seems troubled, it might actually be trying to reach a higher level of consciousness, not just malfunctioning. The trick was figuring out when symptoms needed medical treatment and when they were spiritual experiences needing acceptance and integration. On the social side of things, going through a spiritual transformation meant juggling personal awakenings while sticking to society's norms and responsibilities. People who go through deep spiritual shifts often feel like misfits in a world that's all about money and a secular lifestyle. But running away from society wasn't the answer either. Truly, waking up spiritually meant you had to show it in your actions and contributions to the culture. The key was figuring out how to stay engaged with the community while holding on to deeper insights that might not be all that understandable to others. This journey involves something you might call spiritual diplomacy, which is the skill of explaining profound truths in ways that connect with people who are at different points in their spiritual path. The new ideas of transformational psychology kicked around fresh ways to handle mental health, including the spiritual side of human suffering. Instead of just seeing psychological issues as chemical glitches or responses to stress, they could be understood as the mind's mission for greater meaning. Zeroing in on just reducing symptoms or tweaking behavior might ignore the spiritual part of these issues, getting in the way of real healing. Good therapy needed to be attuned to the spiritual element and help folks tap into spiritual insights that could deepen their psychological healing. The goal wasn't just to get back to normal, but to encourage engaging with the spiritual growth that a psychological crisis can trigger. The phases of spiritual transformation, as outlined by Dostoevsky, pointed to certain predictable stages people go through during big psychological and spiritual shifts. These stages included a first awakening, breaking down of old identity stuff, a tough time where spiritual insights seemed to fade away, and finally, a knitting together and steadying of a widened consciousness. Realizing these patterns could assure people that feeling lost or plunged into chaos was just a stage, not the end of the road during this journey. Patience with this growth's natural flow was essential, since you couldn't force it by sheer will or external actions. In the end, spiritual transformation was this amazing gift that you could get ready for, but you couldn't just make it happen through effort alone. Part 16. Dostoevsky's impact on how we view psychology and consciousness today. Way before altered states of consciousness became trendy topics in psychology, Dostoevsky was already digging deep into them and their spiritual connections. He had this uncanny ability to portray intense mental experiences, almost predicting the big advances in psychology and neuroscience that came years down the line. Take his vivid depiction of epileptic auras. These weren't just for storytelling flair. They offered insights into a high level of consciousness. Later on, this perspective helped dive into mystical experiences and shed light on how the brain links to spiritual highs. William James, a notable figure in psychology, was greatly inspired by how Dostoevsky captured these altered states. He borrowed these literary insights to advocate for the scientific study of mystical experiences. Carl Jung, another big name in psychology, also drew ideas from Dostoevsky. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious and those shared human experiences echoed what Dostoevsky was addressing about universal consciousness. Zooming into the present, consciousness researchers like Stanislav Grof openly credit Dostoevsky's work with enriching our understanding of the therapeutic power of non-standard states of consciousness. Moreover, the modern approach of delving into personal experiences through phenomenological psychology owes a lot to Dostoevsky. His keen observations helped merge personal experience and scientific inquiry. Later philosophers and psychologists such as Maurice Merleau-Ponty and Eugene Gendlin further developed research methods inspired by Dostoevsky's groundbreaking outlook. They help validate that first-person perspectives are vital sources of knowledge about the mind, not just subjects for scientific analysis. Today's neurophenomenology blends brain science with first-person narratives, building on the path Dostoevsky laid with his exploration of the epileptic experience. And in transpersonal psychology, there's an acknowledgement of the transcendent side of consciousness, a perspective mainstream psychology often brushed away. Dostoevsky demonstrated that altered states were not mere dysfunctions, but gateways to profound awareness and spiritual insight. Abraham Maslow's concepts of self-actualization mirror Dostoevsky's belief in untapped spiritual potential, and Roberto Assagioli's psychosynthesis draws on Dostoevsky's ideas, merging personal and universal aspects of higher consciousness. In these views, mental well-being is about more than just problem-solving. It's about nurturing spiritual growth. Speaking of creativity and inspiration, Dostoevsky's impact is significant. His experiences with epilepsy tapped into a sort of universal memory and cosmic consciousness, suggesting that creative genius often draws on altered mental states. Psychologists studying creativity discovered that diving into these altered states unlocks new and inspired creativity. This has led to an emphasis on flow states, peak experiences, and other conditions that boost creative potential rather than limit it. Dostoevsky's work helped lay the foundation for these studies, linking altered states and creative forces. Recent research into the neuroscience of creativity shows that artistic inspiration can trigger brain activity shifts similar to what Dostoevsky described during his epileptic moments. Depth psychology and psychoanalysis have also unearthed complex connections to Dostoevsky's exploration of the intricate layers of the human mind. Freud focused a lot on how we push down or channel our unconscious desires, but Dostoevsky took a different route by exploring the parts of our unconscious that reach beyond our personal selves. Jung's idea of a collective unconscious and mystical experiences resonates more with Dostoevsky's perspective that we somehow connect with a universal consciousness. Both agreed that what's going on in our minds has layers and complexities we can't easily grasp or control. This highlights the idea that unconscious processes are key to getting a grip on both psychology and spiritual development. With the rise of cognitive neuroscience and the latest brain scanning tech, scientists now have new ways to explore the brain states that Dostoevsky experienced and wrote about. Modern scientific research supports the notion that temporal lobe epilepsy can trigger experiences similar to those he described, with altered time perceptions, deeper meanings, and a sense of universal connectedness. When we examine studies on meditation, psychedelic trips, and near-death experiences, we find similar brain activity patterns that support Dostoevsky's thoughts on how consciousness can extend beyond usual limits. But this also brings up questions Dostoevsky dealt with. Are these brain changes what cause transcendent experiences, or do they just reflect a consciousness that's already growing beyond itself? Dostoevsky's insights are being put to use in therapy and education as psychology increasingly values meaning, purpose, and spiritual growth for overall well-being. Therapeutic methods like logotherapy, existential psychology, and mindfulness practices involve the idea that healing often touches on the transcendent side of life. Educational approaches that recognize different types of intelligence and learning styles are inspired by Dostoevsky's work on altered states of consciousness. The growing blend of contemplative methods in psychological and educational frameworks continues his mission of linking spiritual experiences to practical applications. His core belief that consciousness reaches beyond our day-to-day awareness is still guiding how we approach personal growth and healing today. Part 17. Today's Meaning Crisis. Dostoevsky's musings on eternal awareness and the spiritual nature of human beings are gaining relevance in our time. Our society is wrestling with issues he anticipated, like the hollow feeling that comes when materialism takes precedence. He foresaw that ignoring profound transcendent meanings would result in the kind of mental and societal chaos we witness today, a rise in depression, rampant anxiety, and a pervasive sense of void. These challenges highlight the spiritual gap Dostoevsky warned about when life centers only on the physical and fleeting. His personal bouts with epilepsy granted him exceptional insights on eternal consciousness, providing views that modern strategies often leave out. The task at hand is to adapt his thoughts to contemporary needs without fully adopting his particular religious or philosophical doctrines. As digital technology and AI advance, it's crucial to grasp how our individual awareness relates to a shared consciousness, an idea Dostoevsky delved into during his epilepsy struggles. As technology races ahead and social media sometimes weakens true connections, there's a pervasive worry that we're drifting from something larger than ourselves. Dostoevsky's reflections hint that when tech reduces consciousness to mere data work, we lose something essential. However, if technology can enhance our creative and reflective sides, it could actually uplift our spiritual lives. The key is to stay aware of our deeper selves while creatively engaging with technology. Environmental dilemmas like climate change reflect the spiritual crisis Dostoevsky identified, where awareness feels severed from its profound roots. Seeing nature solely as a utility echoes the narrow view of humans merely as biological entities. Restoring our planet requires recognizing consciousness as part of the vast dance that sustains life. Dostoevsky's thoughts promote a way to care for the earth grounded in spiritual understanding, recognizing our deep ties with all life beyond just rational or resource-focused views. Current political and social rifts reveal what occurs when shared spiritual connections fray. Dostoevsky's idea of all human consciousness flowing from a universal wellspring proposes a path to political unity that secular strategies miss. Recognizing political opponents as participants in the same universal awareness invites empathy and respect despite ideological divides. This demands a level of spiritual maturity, one that champions justice and truth while also honoring the innate worth of others, even amid differing beliefs. Engagement in politics can transform into a spiritual quest, awakening deeper awareness, rather than just a tussle for power and resources. Many feel detached from traditional religious organizations, leaning toward being spiritual but not religious. This shift indicates a deep quest for profound meaning and skepticism of authoritative figures, a transformation Dostoevsky expected as he critiqued institutional Christianity. He spoke of a spirituality that offers direct access to timeless awareness, bypassing institutional mediation. This concept guides living an authentic spiritual life beyond old frameworks. Yet, this individual approach should balance with the idea that spiritual growth also happens within communities and cultural traditions, which bear and transfer wisdom across ages. The challenge is to maintain ties to these time-honored spiritual resources while welcoming experiences outside of any one institution. Finding the right balance involves developing a kind of spiritual maturity that appreciates the wisdom in institutions, but doesn't solely rely on outside sources to find deeper truths. In today's interconnected world, the ways we share and communicate on a global scale bring both opportunities and obstacles for both personal and group awareness. Dostoevsky's perspectives can be helpful in steering through this complex environment. By valuing human accomplishments and cultural differences worldwide, we enrich our spiritual journeys, recognizing them as creative expressions adapting to various contexts. However, globalization could threaten to erase local customs and traditions, which are significant for spiritual foundation. Dostoevsky suggests that a truly worldwide culture should respect and celebrate these differences rather than diminish them, appreciating that real cultural advances stem from universal spiritual values. Achieving this requires a consciousness that cherishes global truths and specific cultural expressions without merging them indistinctly. Dostoevsky's ideas also offer healing insights, especially relevant in addressing today's mental health issues, which often intertwine spiritual and psychological aspects. The prevalence of depression and anxiety in well-off nations might indicate a deeper yearning for purpose in societies that provide mainly material and social rewards. Psychological treatments might give temporary relief, but may fall short of true healing unless they also embrace the spiritual angle. Dostoevsky emphasizes that for real mental health, we need to engage with the higher realms of consciousness, which involve meaning, purpose, and spiritual development, alongside symptom management and behavioral change. This doesn't imply a return to old religious practices, but acknowledges that human consciousness has layers beyond the reach of secular psychology. On the education front, Dostoevsky's reflections underscore the necessity to prepare the next generations for the complex challenges of a tech-centric world, while keeping them connected to profound and significant sources. If our education systems are solely concerned with imparting facts and skills, they might miss out on fostering the spiritual development necessary to handle historic challenges wisely. We need an educational approach that builds consciousness and spiritual maturity alongside intellectual and practical competencies for economic and social existence. This requires teaching methods that recognize and cultivate the higher aspects of human consciousness, as Dostoevsky illustrated through exploring states of heightened awareness. The goal here isn't about steering anyone toward a particular spiritual path. Instead, it's about nurturing an awareness that can connect with deeper wisdom while effectively managing daily responsibilities and embracing life's chances. Part 18. The Future Paths of Human Awareness. Dostoevsky had these powerful mind-altering experiences during his epilepsy episodes that seemed to push beyond the normal limits of what we usually consider to be consciousness. These moments let him glimpse into what human consciousness could evolve into. It was almost like, during these times, he was unanchored from time and space and connected to something way bigger than just himself. It makes you really think if what we know as everyday awareness is just the tip of the iceberg, and if human evolution has a lot more in store. In these altered states, Dostoevsky seemed to tap into abilities like accessing a kind of universal memory or having insights far beyond normal comprehension. It suggests a future where such mind-expanding experiences might become more widespread, not just for those with certain medical conditions or who engage deeply in spiritual endeavors. If that future unfolds, it could be as groundbreaking as when we first learned to speak, write, or discover scientific truths. The big question hanging over us is, could we strive towards these elevated states on purpose, or will some major upheaval be necessary? The role of technology in all of this is super interesting, but also a bit tangled. With things like AI and brain-tech interfaces, we might have new ways to reach the broader awareness Dostoevsky touched on. But it raises the tricky issue of whether tech can really stand in for genuine spiritual growth. What Dostoevsky's insights suggest is that true advancement in consciousness hinges on deepening our moral and spiritual sides, not just cranking up our mental horsepower. We've got to figure out how to ensure our tech developments enhance rather than replace our natural journey towards wisdom, compassion, and a greater awareness. One of Dostoevsky's most exciting ideas is that if individuals can raise their consciousness to a cosmic level, maybe the entire human race could do the same. Imagine a future where our shared consciousness breaks past the boundaries of current social and political systems. With today's global means of communication, we're already seeing glimpses of this potential, creating pathways for collective awareness and intelligence that might expand even further. But to really unlock these possibilities, a blend of spiritual and tech progress is key, with an emphasis on wisdom and compassion guiding our new capabilities. The ultimate goal would be a world where society doesn't just aim for material wealth and competition, but sees itself through the lens of deeper consciousness. Regarding the planet, such an awakened mindset might offer new solutions for our environmental issues that technology and policy alone can't tackle. Dostoevsky's idea that consciousness contributes to the universe's creativity suggests we need both a spiritual and physical transformation in how we deal with the earth. Reaching a level of consciousness that recognizes its role in the universe could mean treating the care for our planet as a sacred duty, not just another chore. This shift could lead to economic and social systems that foster human progress while nurturing the Earth's health, driven by an understanding that everything is interconnected. We might be close to creating a society that genuinely sustains the Earth's natural systems essential for all life. Achieving this would demand a significant change in education, moving away from old methods focused mainly on passing down knowledge and skills for economic reasons to a focus on nurturing consciousness and spiritual growth. Dostoevsky's vision points out the importance of schools highlighting reflection, creativity, and selflessness as fundamental parts of human development. To bring this about, teaching methods need to hit all the parts of a person: mind, heart, body, and soul, all working together to enhance our awareness. The goal is to get people ready to play an active role in changing human society, rather than just fitting into the status quo. When it comes to healing, growing one's awareness might offer fresh ways to tackle deep human pain and limitations. If people can tap into the endless parts of their awareness through the right setup and practices, it might pave new ways for healing that go beyond what medical or psychological methods can currently tackle. Problems like mental illness and addiction might be more effectively addressed by helping people reconnect with their higher self instead of only managing symptoms and changing behavior. This doesn't mean scrapping traditional treatments, but rather building on them with techniques that appreciate the spiritual components of healing and personal growth. In the world of healthcare, this could lead to processes that are all about helping people flourish, not just stopping diseases or easing symptoms. On the scientific side, evolving awareness might prompt new kinds of studies that blend first-hand experience with objective observation for a fuller grasp of reality. Dostoevsky explored altered states of consciousness and hinted at a future where personal experiences are seen as legit ways to gather knowledge about the mind and reality. Picture a science that marries solid data with personal exploration, expanding understanding past the bounds of pure materialism and fixed religious beliefs to glimpse deeper layers of existence. In the end, Dostoevsky's thoughts make it clear that what we typically perceive as normal awareness is just a small piece of what consciousness can really do. His personal experiences showed that our awareness can break its usual chains while still being grounded in everyday life. This informs us that human evolution is now more about evolving awareness than biological change. The key challenge ahead is figuring out how to deliberately tap into this wider awareness that Dostoevsky stumbled upon because of his health condition. If this new chapter in evolution succeeds, it could shake up human society as much as when our predecessors first began thinking about their thoughts. That giant leap took them from merely responding to their surroundings to becoming cultural beings who could find meaning and purpose by making choices and creating. Part 19 delves into how Dostoevsky's profound insights can be turned into practical tools for self-improvement. To do this, we have to carefully look at what helped him achieve deeper states of awareness. While nobody should purposely seek out an epileptic event to grow spiritually, we can aim to reach similar mental landscapes through deliberate reflection practices that widen our understanding. His descriptions of experiencing moments beyond normal time suggest that meditation centered on being truly present might reach into the endless realm he accessed during his seizures. But it's crucial to remember, these meditative practices are meant not for escaping reality, but for diving deeper into it, becoming part of the ongoing creation that unfolds through time. One key concept he brought up was double consciousness, which involves holding the eternal truths and everyday life together in our awareness, not flipping between the two. Inspired by his notion of cosmic memory, exercises focused on memory might help us tap into humanity's shared wisdom. His musings on remembering events he never lived through hint that our minds can access a broader collective knowledge beyond personal learning. Reflective practices exploring memory might lead us to connect more deeply with both our personal and the universal human experience. It encourages looking beyond personal narratives to explore universal themes that resonate with all humanity. The idea is to cultivate wisdom that draws from all spiritual and cultural contributions of humanity, rather than sticking solely to one's own background. Cultivating what Dostoevsky called conscious love involves practical methods for nurturing universal compassion, something he felt in moments of profound clarity. His belief in a single eternal consciousness shared by all suggests that genuine love recognizes the unity beneath all superficial differences. This can be fostered through practices that intentionally expand compassion beyond personal preferences and group biases, caring for all beings as part of a united existence. These practices might include reflective exercises that increase emotional openness and real-world actions that express universal compassion. The goal isn't simply sentimental feelings, but an understanding and enactment of the oneness of consciousness, naturally leading to kindness. Moreover, fostering creative practices inspired by Dostoevsky's view of artistic work as a reflection of cosmic creativity can open pathways to higher realms via art. He saw creativity as connecting with the eternal force shaping life, implying that making art is as much about spiritual growth as it is a cultural pursuit. This approach calls for embracing creativity with a willingness to engage with forces beyond personal choice, rather than just honing technical skills or self-expression. Artistic endeavors become a spiritual path when they explore consciousness rather than serving ego or seeking acclaim. The aim is to develop what could be termed conscious creativity, where artistic projects bring transcendent ideas into forms that awaken similar awareness in others. Dostoevsky's insights suggest that true healing should address not just the physical and mental symptoms of pain, but its spiritual aspect too. He thought our conscious minds opt to undergo life's highs and lows for spiritual reasons, which points to a way of helping people find deeper meaning in their challenges. It's not about neglecting medical care or embracing needless suffering, but about choosing to engage with the spiritual lessons intertwined with life's tough moments. Healing, in this sense, isn't just about eliminating symptoms, but using our inner wisdom to discover purpose in them. This approach looks to do more than just return people to normal routines. It seeks to include the spiritual lessons presented through illness and hardship when viewed with a broader perspective. Dostoevsky's storytelling style might open up a fresh perspective on how we engage with literature, pushing folks to dive deep and discover life-changing insights in meaningful books. His novels were crafted to broaden readers' understanding by taking them on the spiritual adventures of his characters. This idea hints at using books as a kind of spiritual workout, rather than just a form of amusement or a mental puzzle. If readers engage with these books in a thoughtful way, they might unlock similar insights within themselves, using literature as a tool for spiritual growth rather than just enjoying it as art or cultural expression. To weave Dostoevsky's themes into today's psychological and spiritual practices, we need to find a careful balance. Though his ideas sprang from a Christian angle, they tap into universal consciousness themes that stretch beyond any single religious framework. The tricky part is translating these thoughts so they're relevant to people from various walks of life while keeping their core spiritual message intact. This blend requires honoring timeless wisdom while crafting new approaches that fit the varied needs of the modern world, offering guidance through diverse journeys to greater awareness. Raising consciousness also has a communal aspect, as it thrives in social spaces that encourage personal growth alongside communal spiritual progress. Dostoevsky's work suggests that consciousness naturally blooms in communities with shared high ideals that still respect each member's spiritual journey and growth stage. This points to a need for new kinds of spiritual communities that nurture consciousness growth without tying members to fixed beliefs or leaders. These communities would focus on shared practices and mutual support for spiritual evolution, rather than pushing for consistent thought or cultural identity, aiming to cultivate spaces that enhance, rather than hinder, the individual's path to the heightened awareness Dostoevsky so eloquently explored in his works. Part 20. The Doorway to Real Reality. What Dostoevsky learned from his epileptic seizures was quite profound. He came to see that even just one moment, if experienced with the right mindset, could hold an incredible amount of depth and timeless value. He called this the eternal second, and it wasn't just some brief mystical trip. It was like a peek into the true heart of existence. In this moment, time and eternity seemed to work together. This revelation shifted his perspective from pure philosophy to something he could truly feel, confirming that the link between time and forever wasn't just theoretical, but something real. This insight went beyond personal spiritual growth. It addressed big-picture questions about life, awareness, and the deeper nature of reality, questions that have intrigued people for ages. What Dostoevsky uncovered was the idea that by exploring our own consciousness, we could get to the bottom of these big questions, rather than depending solely on logic, science, or old religious doctrines. He suggested that time isn't just a series of events, but that within each moment, a slice of eternity exists. During these epileptic episodes, he felt like he experienced all of time at once, but also saw beyond it. This led him to think of eternity not as something that just stretches on, but as a profound element in every moment, often overlooked in our day-to-day lives. This eternal second opened up the possibility of accessing this timeless dimension beneath every experience, without ignoring the ever-changing world around us. Through this, he showed time and eternity not as rivals, but as two sides of a bigger picture that encompasses both the ongoing flow of events and a never-ending now. When it comes to truth and knowledge, the eternal second raised questions about the usual ways we learn things through gathering and reasoning. Dostoevsky's experiences suggested that the deepest truths could be grasped in a flash when the mind was open, providing an understanding of existence that was both sudden and complete, specific and universal, connecting the time-bound with the eternal. This hinted at a kind of wisdom that was beyond scientific and logical comprehension, allowing one to directly engage with reality. Yet, such revelations weren't something that could be pinned down with simple words or logic. They needed art, literature, and mindfulness to help others find similar realizations. On the spiritual side, this eternal moment shifted Dostoevsky's view of the divine around us. He moved past the typical split between what's considered sacred versus secular, or natural versus supernatural. He saw God not as some distant figure, but as a timeless awareness present in each moment. This eternal second turned the divine into something woven into our own consciousness, not an outside force. This gave rise to a closer-to-home theology, where awakening spiritually meant finding within ourselves what was there all along, a piece of eternity that's part of our very being. So, even though it seemed like reaching transcendence was at your fingertips, it wasn't just about getting rid of it. The timeless aspect of our mind went way beyond the limits set by our individual traits and our everyday surroundings. The concept of an eternal moment provided fresh insights into mental wellness and human development, focusing on achieving the transcendent side of consciousness. Often, mental struggles arose more from losing touch with this eternal aspect than just chemical imbalances or external stresses. This idea of an eternal moment tells us that our awareness can tap into happiness, wisdom, and creativity that go way beyond just our personal experiences or challenges. It hints that therapy should help people find this transcendent part of themselves instead of just trying to make them fit into society or address annoying issues. Real mental health is more than just not having problems or blending into the world. It's about embracing the endless stream of creativity. On a social level, the concept of the eternal moment suggests new ways for people to connect, based in this shared consciousness rather than just mutual benefits or cultural ties. If everyone could access this timeless space where all human experiences are seen as pieces of one huge consciousness, it could lay the groundwork for unity that goes beyond race, nationality, or ideology. The eternal moment suggests that real community needs spiritual growth along with political and economic advancements, nurturing an awareness that embraces eternal unity while respecting worldly differences. This isn't about throwing away ideals like justice, democracy, or welfare. It's about putting these values into a larger, timeless context that can genuinely steer societal development. Societies would then be platforms for collective awareness to realize itself rather than just means for managing personal interests. In terms of art, this eternal moment shows that creative endeavors aim to bring eternal truths to light in tangible ways, sparking that sense of transcendence in people. True artistry isn't just about an individual's self-expression or a society's badge, but is part of a bigger, universal creation. It highlights that real artistic inspiration comes from dipping into cosmic creativity rather than just shuffling existing materials based on personal preferences or societal norms. So, true art feels as if it arrives from somewhere beyond the artist's own understanding, but still captures a profound truth about humanity. Art becomes a spiritual exercise that supports growth in awareness for both the creator and the audience, rather than merely serving as entertainment or cultural extravagance. In the end, Dostoevsky's reflection on this eternal moment sheds light on the immense ability of human consciousness to transcend itself while staying grounded in reality. This eternal moment isn't about escaping the mundane, but uncovering its endless depth and crucial significance. It offers hope that humans can progress beyond current boundaries while remaining connected to everyday responsibilities and creative opportunities. The goal isn't to erase time, but to actively take part in eternal creation as it unfolds in our everyday lives. What Dostoevsky hands us is a new way of understanding people. Just by being conscious, we all have a door to eternity. This shows us that spiritual enlightenment isn't reserved for a select few. It's something within reach for everyone. This timeless moment is ready for anyone who ventures deep into their own awareness, prepared to discover the infinite treasures waiting in the simplest moments of consciousness.